Enemy power-up detected.
Seven MechWarriors, and welcome to another episode of Incoming Missile, a MechWarrior Online Podcast. First of all, I'd just like to thank everyone who's watched or listened to our previous couple of episodes, and in particular anyone who's taken the time to reach out and send us a bit of feedback on those podcasts. And welcome, Cozened, Indigo. How are you?
Very good, mate. Very good. How are you?
Yeah, good, man. Good. So we've got a couple of episodes up there already under our belts.
We do. So obviously, hopefully you've all listened to our first one, which was on player skill and matchmaking. That was the first in our look at balance in the game. And we did release a mini-pod, a little short one that was in response to the NG TV discussion on balance as well. So you can find those on all the major podcast platforms. You can find them on YouTube. Make sure to subscribe if you do find it on there, or also on SoundCloud. So search for Incoming Missile Podcast and check out those two if you haven't listened already.
Yeah, great. And in particular, thank you if you guys took the time to send us a bit of feedback or your thoughts on some of the things that we said in those two episodes. And if you had something that you wanted to get in front of us, or just a discussion point that you thought would be good, or just something you wanted to talk about with the rest of the community, we can be reached on Twitter. You can tweet us at IncomingP, or you can comment on YouTube or Reddit in Outreach. Or if you prefer to keep your thoughts just between you and us, you can email us at incomingmissilepodcast@gmail.com. This is the second video in our balance series, so we are hoping to work through sort of some of the major aspects of balance in the game. As Cozened said, our first one was on player skill and matchmaker, and this one's going to be covering more about mech balance. We're hoping to do another few videos like that, and leading up to a bit of a conclusion where we make some recommendations to PGI about potentially how balance in the game could be improved. And that's going to be based on your guys' feedback and your guys' input, which we're hoping to collect.
It's exactly right, Kat. We're hoping to help people understand the balance picture. We're focusing on what we think are the fundamental aspects that influence balance and therefore influence performance. So we're very keen to hear what you think about what we have said, what we say today, and what we will say in the upcoming balance-related podcasts.
So we've got a bit of a plan to put together some resources, both for the community and for PGI, who definitely listen to these podcasts. With that in mind, we will be asking for your feedback in the near future, so look out for that, and also look out for opportunities for free stuff in our giveaways, and we've got some plans for the future as well. We'd like to, I know you guys love listening to our voices talking back and forth, but we'd also like to do some interviews. Cozened, you had some people in mind, I think?
Yeah, I mean, we're very keen to interview other content creators and get an idea of the experience of MWO, their experience of creating that content, and again to bring another voice beyond just yours and mine's, Capn.
As beautiful Kiwi accents as they are. Also, we could potentially do some mech reviews on any new content that goes into the game. And we're also open to hearing your ideas about the kind of things you'd like to hear on the podcast. If you have any suggestions, then get in touch by all means.
Absolutely, and look, the best way to do that is to follow us on Twitter at IncomingP. Anything we do, we will announce via there, so make sure that you find us and follow us there. Of course, subscribe to us on YouTube to catch the videos that we release. And yeah, of course, watch for us on Reddit in the forums as well for those announcements.
And as previously discussed, we are going to pick a lucky winner, someone who's commented on our video, either on Reddit or in those places that we mentioned, and we'll be drawing that and putting it on YouTube.
another good reason to subscribe or follow us on Twitter. We'll be announcing that winner in the next day or so after this podcast is released. Alright, 07 Mech Warriors, we are back and we are going to kick off this discussion around mechs and how mechs affect balance. How you doing, Capn?
Yeah, good man, and you?
Very good, very good. How's the faction warfare going?
It's pretty entertaining. Some of the modes are giving us some hard work, but running around and round in Conquest is pretty fun.
It's not a bad format, really, eh?
No, it's actually pretty good. I'd like to play it some more.
So, obviously playing Faction Warfare, we get a chance to play with a few mechs, and as said, we're going to talk about how that does affect the overall picture of balance. As we know, mechs are impacted and can get tweaked up or down quite frequently. So, Kat, I guess the first question around mechs and mech balance is, why are mechs even different? Why aren't all mechs in the MechWarrior universe just the same?
Probably one thing we can all agree on is that it's good that mechs are different from each other, but if it would make it certainly easier to balance if they're all the same, I suppose.
Yeah, certainly would.
But yeah, there's what are we up to, 700 something mechs in the game, and it's I think everyone has their favorite one, and it's kind of cool that they've all got a little niche to fit into to greater or less extent.
Yeah, and I guess that's probably a good way to look at it. That the reason that mechs are different is that they provide the color in which the BattleTech universe is painted. If they're all the same,
then I like that.
Universe is that's pretty poetic, isn't it? That if they're all the same, then the whole thing looks the same, and if all you're doing is changing what's on that mech, it would become pretty boring pretty quick, right?
Yeah, and there's as many mechs as there are ways to play the game, I guess you could say, or potentially there's a few more mechs than there are ways to play the game, but at least you can go out there with a couple of different mechs and do something very different.
Yeah, and I guess it's probably the that leads into why the next reason that mechs are different is that MechWarrior is a role-based game, so it's
supposedly.
Yeah, supposedly. But look, mechs are different weights, for the reason that they would serve different functions on the battlefield. So you have mechs different because the mechs are the kind of the Lego blocks that you build these game modes around. The way that you design a game mode, I guess, would depend on the way that you want the different mechs to act within it. So generally you at least have that differentiation between mechs in class, which is those tonnage ranges. If you didn't have the different tonnage ranges, then it would be hard to fit them to different roles.
Yeah, and I guess things can cross those borders as well. You have your pseudo lights and your pseudo mediums and all that kind of thing, where an assassin plays like a light, whereas a cougar plays like a medium, perhaps.
Yeah, and dividing that 720 up, you've got this continuum of roles across tonnage and the different purposes that each of those mechs will have, and sometimes a mech can fit multiple purposes, but the reason that you want them different is so that they can do different things.
Yeah. It's fun to run around getting people's butts and SRM bombing them, but it's also fun to sit far away plinking things with AC2s if you like that sort of thing.
MechWarriors provide the color. Obviously they form the basis for the lore and the way that the BattleTech, it helps define the BattleTech universe. And of course, in a game sense, you want the mechs to play different roles so that you can have different game modes. I guess one of the other main reasons that mechs are different is that in a free-to-play game like MechWarrior Online, mechs are the fundamental unit of currency. They're the US dollar of the MechWarrior world. They are the mech economy, and if you don't have a mech economy, you don't have a free-to-play game, right?
Yeah, that's the thing we're all striving to get, generally speaking, is working towards getting a new mech, especially when you start playing. You get your first mech, and then usually people just set their sights on what am I going to get next.
Yeah, you want PGI will want different mechs in the game because they can sell that, right? You want to collect them, you want to get C-bills, you want to buy MC for mech bays. That forms that kind of the fundamental economy for the way that they make money off the game.
And let's not underestimate as well, like how much investment people have already in these mechs before they even come to MechWarrior Online, because most of the mechs in the game already have a story and associated with them. And some people, have played that mech in MechWarrior 2 or whatever, and that was their favorite one, so they're pretty keen to get it in this game.
While we're on the discussion of mechs, that leads into the next question, which is what makes those mechs different. And I guess when we're asking that question, we're saying, is what makes a mech good or bad? Maybe I can make this at least a little bit easier for conversation's sake, and talk, I guess, about maybe some general categories that help make a mech good or bad, or at least categories that they can excel at or not. So I'll just go through these, and then maybe we can talk about each one of these individually after I've outlined them. The first thing around the flexibility of a mech. So generally, can that mech be adapted to compete across various different styles, game modes, that kind of thing? Can the mech specialize? So can it do one thing really, really well? Can it excel in one role or play style, or is there one build that is particularly good? That's an important one when we think about dominant metas around balance. How usable is it? So, how difficult is it to play the mech to get the most out of it? And when we're talking about that, we're talking about, its mobility, hard points, like you were saying. Is it easy to be the pilot of a mech like that? How long will it take you to die? So we're kind of talking about the general survivability. If we take into account the things that help you avoid damage, whether it be raw hit points, armor geometry, how quick you are, those kind of things. How quickly can you kill other mechs? So what kind of firepower can you pack? The type of firepower, the number of hard points you have, where those hard points are, etc. And that's been obviously pretty popular recently around Clan Laser Vomit and the 94 point alpha Deathstrike Bogey mech. And then the last one that I've got there is how fun the mech is to play. So does that mech have a cult following? Is there something about it that the lore warriors love, or something like that? And I guess the best example I can give there is the Ubi. Ubi has this cult following that despite the mech having maybe so attributes in those other areas that I talked about, it's just fun to play and has that cult following. So of those areas, its flexibility, the way it can do one thing really well, its usability, playing the mech, is it easy? How long will it take you to die? So your survivability and your firepower, how quickly can you kill other things? And then the fun element.
Yeah, well, let's compare notes, because I made a little list as well.
Oh, notes. Professional podcasters.
I can only get so erect. Notes. This is why it gets Cozened going, guys.
Structure.
All right.
Organization.
So some of the things you already hit upon. So we had geometry. And that includes where PGI puts the hitboxes, which is kind of an intangible thing, because you don't get to see that in game apart from your damage registration where it goes. You just so some mechs look good on paper, but then actually their side torsos are much bigger than they could otherwise be, and they're easy to knock off. Sunspider being an example when it came out.
Or the Thanatos.
A lot better now
with its large bust. Yeah.
So then there's the hard points, like you mentioned, and where they are, so how high up they are, and how they're arranged. So if you have a lot of high mounted weapons, that's going to be better than just one high mounted weapon and then 4 in your belly button. And then inside of that there's actuators as well, because that allows you to put different weapons into those hard points. And also within that, nested within that, what you touched upon, there's alpha potential. So if it lets you bring it allows you to bring lots of big weapons, and it's a big mech, that's going to obviously make it better. There's quirks, which is kind of an obvious one, but then how those quirks tie in with the hard points, like how many ballistic hard points it has, for example, or missile hard points, is actually defines how important those quirks are. For example, the Grasshopper has a missile hard point in the head, and then it's heavily quirked, but obviously that hardpoint is in the head, you're not ever going to be able to put much in there, right?
LRM 5.
Yeah, exactly. Then there's whether it's clan or IS affects whether the mech is good or bad, quite honestly. And then within that as well, whether it's a battle mech or omni mech, because obviously some clan mechs are battle mechs, like the Hunchback 2C or the Mad Cat 2, and that makes them better because it means that you can effectively decide down to a granular level of detail exactly what is going to be on that mech, as long as the hard points that it comes with supports that. Which leads into pod space. So some mechs are quite nice on paper, but then they're just, because of fixed components or because they've got a really large fixed engine like the Black Lana, that just doesn't allow you to do anything very much with them, or not as much as you would otherwise be able to. Mobility, that includes, for example, how far your torso can twist, or how far your arms can move, and those sort of things. But also, how fast you twist, how fast your mech turns, those kind of things. Engine cap, if it's a battle mech. Jump jets, and whether it can take, let's call them additionals like SM and mask. So those are my major ones. It's quite a long list.
It's a good list.
Then I just wanted to include a little bit more, if I may, which is some more abstract stuff, because in a way they can be more important. My first one on the list is I just put meta, which means is it the kind of mech that can carry the kind of weapons and loadouts that are currently the meta, right?
It's a really good point.
Mm-hmm. And then you talked about flexibility, and I sort of I put flexibility as well, but I put that down as that it can survive nerfs. So talking about a kind of a different kind of flexibility. So if it's the kind of mech like, say, the Death Strike, where they're trying to nerf it, but hey, you can just chop out this weapon for that weapon and it can still be great, well, then it's flexible in that way.
Yeah.
Design focus. So if it's hard points and quirks and hitboxes and all that stuff, focus it to playing a particular role, then it's got a good design focus and it's going to be better for that. Couple more. Threat rating. This is actually a surprisingly big one. If you're in the kind of mech that instantly gets focused, like a piranha, then you're going to have a much worse time than if you're in something like a Kit Fox, where people are going to target you with much more prejudice. And then I think that there's mechs on the other end of the scale as well, like the Kodiak and things like that back in the day. If someone saw a Kodiak, everyone on the team's going to turn and start shooting the Kodiak. And it's still kind of true, even though the Kodiak's not as good as it once was. And then, there's a few more points there, like how the animations work, and things like that we touched on, like its nostalgia value. It can make it, quite honestly, if a mech is the mech that someone played when they were 8 years old and loved, they're going to say that mech's good, whether or not it is, or they're going to enjoy playing it, or they're going to want to buy it. And that's my list.
It's a good list, Capn, and you've highlighted quite a few things there. I guess probably the fact that we've been able to put two lists together and we've been able to cover off so many things maybe highlights the fact around how influential a mech is and how difficult it is to balance per mech. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and how some mechs can really shine because they tick a lot of those boxes all at the same time, or how a mech can look really good on paper, but then when it comes out, it's DOA or falls a bit flat because it just one of those really important criteria it really doesn't have.
So if we were to get into the mind of PGI and let's say we're designing up a mech, or we're picking a mech that's already in lore, and we're factoring in all those things that make a mech good or bad, what approach should PGI be taking when they're putting out good mech packs? And just to keep this in mind, remember that you've got to put out a mech pack every month or 6 weeks or something like that.
Yeah, there's a pipeline. Well, I mean, the key thing to start with is I this is my understanding of how PGI would go about it, right? And this is just based on intuition. So PGI would look up the mech in the technical readouts, TROs, that they're going to make, and then they'd look at the loadouts and the kind of things and the artwork that it already has, because people were kind of potentially attached to those artworks in their past, and then from there, I think Alex is their mech designer. He's a god among men. But I think before Alex even sees it, there's a list of sort of a bit of a design brief where it's saying, we're making this mech based roughly on this artwork, and it's, maybe they've picked out a few of the variants that they're going to put in the game because there's a slot for them in the game. We don't already have a mech that, say, can take 4 ballistic and 4 missile, so that's kind of, a niche that's waiting to be filled within the game. And then, they'll pick out one variant from that for the artwork to be made from. This is my understanding. And Alex goes away and he looks at, we've seen a little bit of his design process, that he's looking at the sort of design influences that go into that mech. So say if it's a blood asp, you'll be looking at pictures of snakes and things like that, right? Because you want it to, if you look through the mechs, especially the ones like the clan ones that are based on animals and things like that, they definitely have an influence of the source of a snake or a shark or whatever it is.
A wolf.
A wolf, yeah, that's a good one. And so he's got those images arranged outside, and he's drawing in while keeping in the mind that the hard points need to be here and there. But I think from that point, at least, my gut tells me that he has a lot of say in how it's going to look in the end, and where that can lead to influencing where those hard points are going to be in terms of height, and how they're going to be clustered together, and that sort of thing. And then I guess we get our first look at it from there. How does that sound? Does it sort of differ from what you might have thought they would go through as a process?
Yeah. Look, I mean, you're the design expert, so all that stuff makes sense from my point of view. I mean, truth be told, as the potato of the podcast, I hadn't really thought or don't really understand that part of it. But I guess probably what you've said thus far is that PGI would consider a niche, maybe what they want the mech to do or what's maybe missing at the moment. So they're looking at the current environment, and that becomes the first constraint.
Yeah. It certainly tracks that. Just to feed off what you're saying, it tracks that. If you look at the mechs that are coming out, they seem to be almost grouped, and it's like, okay, now we're going to put out mechs that have a bunch of ballistics and missiles together, which is something we haven't had before. And so that kind of feeds into what you're saying. What about marketability? Maybe that's the first thing that PGI is looking at, like which mech out of all these possible mechs that we could put into the game that are, because obviously they're working to a timeline, vaguely. So out of all these mechs, which mech do people want in the game the most? I feel like that would be a fairly major consideration. What mech is, people just itching to get their hands on?
Yeah, so the way that they put together this schedule would be, looking at what mechs might be more popular from a sale perspective.
But so you'd have to think about it at some point before you even started making the artwork and all that kind of stuff. Are we going to sell these?
Yeah, I guess we could probably generally agree though that there are those constraints at the start, that what mech is released, what that mech looks like, and what attributes it's given around geometry and those other things that we covered off in our lists about what makes a mech good or bad. Initially, it has to go through that constraint process. The mech has to look a certain way. It has to be the mech that it is going to be marketable and that they can sell to the population. So automatically, you're on the back foot or the front foot. But it adds an element or a constraint, as I keep saying, to what the balance picture looks like, right?
For sure. And I think we've kind of worked our sort of intuition and logic up to the point where Alex has put out that concept, and we've got potentially also we get the store page with all the loadouts and all that kind of stuff. And from that point, almost it gets quite interesting for me because, well, for a start, we know a lot more about how that process happens after that because we've seen video streams and things like that, people doing the 3D files and things. And so you've got at PGI's office, on the to-do board, you've got the concept art of whatever mech it is. Let's say it's the Blood Asp, and then you've got a list of variants and their hard points. From there, then the modeling team gets their hands on it, and then they start putting it into 3D because at that point they've only got sort of elevations, front, side, blah blah blah, and that can leave a lot of vagary. And as soon as you turn something on a isometric 45-degree view, there's gonna be questions like, oh, how does that, what does happen behind this thing, between the front and the right side, and how are we going to fit our normal model of a course into that hard point that he's drawn, or those laser lenses that they use all the time might not fit exactly in the way that it's been drawn in proportion. So then you need to start sort of shifting and adapting and scaling and adjusting so that obviously as players we want to be able to look at a mech on the battlefield and say, well, that's going to be carrying such and such a kind of weapon, LBX 10s or lasers or PPCs or whatever. So it kind of needs to be standardized. And those kind of translations, and then you're also looking at the different variants and going, well, he's drawn a model with 2 ballistic shoulders and 6 energies split between the arms, but the next variant has none of that. It's got missiles and blah. So how does that look? Because he's probably not drawing concept art for that stage. Certainly we don't see that. So there's some interesting translations and adaptations that go in there that we don't kind of get to see the decision making in there.
Generally, you're saying that the first thing to consider around balance is that the mech has to go through the design process, the design and market process, which means that the way that the mech will be modelled and designed will set a platform for some of those other decisions around balance, the sides, the geometry, and some of those other things we talked about.
Yeah, and we've seen it's interesting because for the community, because we've seen mechs that have looked really great on the concept art, and then at least for people's perception, they've fallen flat when it comes out on the model. They don't like it as much because it doesn't quite capture whatever it was. The shoulder mounted ballistics on the Blood Asp is a premium example. Didn't look exactly like it did in the concept art, so people were really disappointed, which obviously people lose a bit of faith in the idea.
Yeah, although we've talked about the difficulty that might be involved in the design process that goes into that.
Yeah, and I guess as part of that, as you're working along, and you'd have iterative design where you'd be producing an initial draft of the 3D model of your Blood Asp, and then it would be fed back into the process, and your balance team would look at it and go, well, actually, those shoulders are just going to get popped off, or those legs are too skinny, and it's gonna make that mech too hard to hit. So write some stuff on red pen, and then it goes back to the 3D modeler for adjustment, you'd assume.
I mean, you've talked about the design process, and that is obviously pretty crucial and probably the starting point. But a lot of people obviously that are listening will be like, man, I appreciate that, but when it hits and when I buy it, I want it, regardless of the way that it looks, to be competitive, right? Most people don't necessarily want to pay to win, but they want to make sure that when they buy the mech, that it is worth the investment.
Not DOA, to use the community term. dead on arrival.
So most people, as you say, would not want the mech to be DOA. They'd want to know that they've paid their money and that the mech is at least competitive. So why then wouldn't you, when you're releasing a mech, ensure that every time it is competitive, that the geometry is good, that if it does have, large side torsos like the Fafnir or the Thanatos or something else, that you by default are applying quirks because you know that those things might get popped off really easily, or the Sun Spider. Why wouldn't you release a mech and ensure that it's either quirked to the level that it can be competitive, or it's compensated in some way?
It's a tricky one, because on one hand, I mean, even as a business, you want people to get the mech in their mech lab and then be able to enjoy it and have fun with it, because that is, a key part of the purchase process, that you get to enjoy what you bought and not get frustrated with it. Because remember that there's an event with every mech release that collect a certain amount of damage, and then you can unlock some color schemes and war horns and things like that for your new mech. And those events can be very frustrating as a player when the mech falls flat and you're going out there with your new toy and it's just getting smashed every time. On PGI's side, I mean, that is part of PGI's purview. They should want the mechs to be good when they come out, because otherwise people are going to be left with a sour taste in their mouth. And first impressions last, let's not forget. So, things like the Thanatos and the Sun Spider even now have a bit of a stigma about them. People, you don't see as many of them on the battlefield as perhaps they deserve, because when they came out, they were not great. On the other hand, if you released a mech, I mean, I'm just spitballing here.
Yeah, that's what we had to do, spitball.
For your entertainment. Are you not entertained?
Support us on Patreon to get more spitballing.
Delivered fresh daily. Fortnightly. So I think it would be really bad for PGI if they were to release something that was overpowered intentionally, and then realize that they'd pushed that bar too far into the overpowered range, and then have to nerf it. Can you imagine the community sentiment to, having my new toy gets nerfed now?
I can imagine, but maybe would that be a viable strategy if you expected the shelf life of the mech to be like a year? So what about if the common understanding was that you're going to buy this mech and at some stage it's going to be depowered, for lack of a better word, but that's not going to happen quickly. You're going to get at least a year of it, not necessarily being the dominant meta, but at least being competitive. Because we're not saying that, okay, you've got to buy the latest mech, the Vulcan, and if you don't buy that mech, you're just going to get your ass handed to you. But what about making it slightly overpowered so that it automatically goes into the competitive bracket, and then if it starts to get out of hand, you do roll it back a bit, but you don't do that until a year's time? I mean, is that, would that work?
No. In one word, no, I don't think so, because, I mean, on one hand, you've got the people who've purchased it who are potentially going to get shitty when you nerf it, and maybe that's not such a major concern if your plan was to nerf it down the track and you've had your fun kind of thing. But on the other side, all the people that didn't buy it are going to get shitty because it's pay to win. Basically, they're going to call pay to win, even if it's not like super pay to win. Even if it's just good, people are going to get upset because it's probably just being good makes it better than a lot of the mechs out there already.
I mean, it's a really good point, and it's kind of one of the things that it's almost one of those understandings out in the community that PGI almost has to be dedicated to making it free to play, and if they push the pay to win button too much, then they do cop a lot of flack, right?
Yeah, totally. And I think honestly, I think that they probably intentionally. I don't know, but here's a conspiracy theory for you.
Oh, tin hats. Okay, listeners, tin hats on.
Everybody, put your tinfoil hats on now. All right, and here we go. So, if I was PGA, this is what I'd do. I'd put out some mechs that were really, really good every now and then the rest of the time I'd put out some mechs that were good or okay. And that means that those mechs that are really, really good, and hopefully they're obviously good, I can make a crap ton of money off those. And then the other mechs, I can make some money because some people just buy everything, or that mech has a nostalgia value, or some of the other criterias. Someone just likes that thing, likes the builds that you can run on that, for example. And that means that you can mitigate your your sort of pay to win meter. Every now and then you can pump a cool shot on that pay to win meter and vent out some some pay to win, and because hey, look, we're only putting out these OP mechs every one in, let's say, 4 or 5. What do you think of that idea?
The theory does make sense. I guess it's almost a marketing strategy, right? So you do have one mech that is obviously going to excel, and then the other mechs that you release, you don't make them bad. You just make them kind of middle of the row. And I guess probably what we need to realize is that when they release a mech, then there might be 5 or 6 different mechs, and you could actually just have 1 or 2 variants. A mech pack can be worth buying even if 1 or 2 variants is can be competitive. If we take the Piranha for example, it does have one variant that is head and shoulders above the others.
I just wanted to come back to an earlier point that we were talking about this idea that you could just put out the mechs OP and then later on down the track nerf them. Well, it really needs to be mentioned that is the community sentiment of what happens. Whether that's true or not, I'm not sure. Personally, I don't think it really is. But there is a little bit of correlation for that by the time it gets into free-to-play territory, so, releases for C-bills, in other words, that's when inevitably the nerfs come rolling out for it, because, you've had this mech for a year in the game, and now it's time we bring it in line with the others. Well, that again leaves a sour taste in people's mouths who've been waiting all this time to be able to buy it on their free-to-play account, or, just didn't have the money, or were cheapskates or whatever. So I think that would be something I'd try to avoid as well.
Yeah, and look, it sounds like it's a delicate balance. There's that word again. It sounds like a delicate balance in that marketing strategy to get that stuff right.
And I really think PGA actually does a pretty stand-up job of releasing mechs that aren't all the best thing out there. I mean, if you just put together a list of the hero mechs that are in the game, which are, you always have to pay real money for those mechs. You're never going to be able to get them free to play. Those are the ones that you'd be most worried would be pay to win, right?
Yeah.
But actually, I put together a little list earlier today because I knew we were going to be having this conversation.
Professional podcasters.
Yeah. Out of the 100 plus heroes in the game, I counted about 11 to, let's say, 20 that were, better than everything around them. And that includes, especially if you go up to the 20 number, that really includes ones that are just better than, they're a good mech, and then the hero is just slightly better, or it has an omnipod that you need to make the best build, or those kind of things. So that doesn't include mechs that are just better than the other variants in that chassis.
Yeah.
But it does include, so that 20 number does include, as I've got the Pirate's Bane, K9, Grinner, Shard, Purifier, Packet, IV4, Black Widow, Revenant, that's Mad Dog, the Hellbringer Virago, the linebacker, Redline, Jade Kite, Sleipnir, Scorch, the Keeper, the Deathstrike, and the Ultraviolet. So some of those mechs in there, like the Pirate's Bane or the Ultraviolet, are not the top tier. They're just they're a good mech, and that's allows you to do some of the best builds on those mechs. So the Packet is probably a good example.
Yeah, and heroes, and mix with omnis. Of course, the heroes almost have a you're not as likely to get the value out of the hero when it's an omni mech.
Yeah, there's plenty of hero omnis that just aren't that great, like the Lacerator or the Nova Hero or whatever other one. They just sort of add another option, but they're not really better. So that's a pretty good strike rate, I reckon, for they're money makers for not making them all too good. What's that, about 20%?
Yeah. So you think that there's potentially a little bit of a misperception out in the community that it is pay to win, and that it's unfairly skewed towards the pay to win model.
I don't know. I mean, I think that again, if I was running PGI and I had my cynical marketing hat on, I would probably make sure that amongst those heroes there was some money makers that are gonna just keep ticking over a little bit of goose that lays the golden egg type mix. I'm looking at you, IV4 or Sleipnir. That's some of my favorite mix. Please don't nerf.
So look, we've covered quite a few details there around mechs, why the mechs have to be different, what might make a mech good or bad, and then maybe some of the challenge in releasing new mechs. I mean, these are all things that are going to be relevant to the balance discussion. Another thing that I want to chuck at you around the difficulty with balance is the way that mechs are affected by other balance mechanisms. So, last time we talked about clan lasers in reaction to the podcast from NGTV. Is it fair to say that not all mechs are affected equal when there is a change, and therefore in releasing a mech you almost have to think about what other balance changes you're going to make?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, and PGI do that. I mean, for example, before the Piranha came out, there was some other mechs that came out with a lot of machine guns, and then a little bit of rebalancing that happened. There was a few machine gun events. I think that's PGI's real PTS right there, when they put in event where you got to do a certain amount of damage with machine guns. They can collect a lot of good data out of that, I suspect. And so then you put out your Mistlinks G, and then with 8 machine guns, and you can watch how that's performing, and then a little ways down the track, once you've adjusted those values somewhat without hurting too many feelings, then you can put Piranha in the game and hopefully get it in the right place. Because it probably should be mentioned in amongst all these mech balance considerations and designing and building and putting a new mech into the game, that's a prediction. How good is this mech going to be is crystal ball gazing for sure.
Yeah.
You're putting a mech into the game with all those variables that we discussed, and how they all synergize and come together in the mech it's gonna, I think that the live environment's going to throw you a few curveballs for sure.
All right, so here's another thing then we're going to throw at you around balance. We've talked about the mechanisms and what makes a mech good or bad, and in essence we're talking about the way that it will perform. But you did allude earlier that people feel certain ways about mechs, and there's nothing else in the game that has an emotional attachment than mechs. So whatever decisions you are making about mechs, from the way it looks to what weapons it carries to 100 other things about it, you have to consider, or you're going to be risking the ire of people's emotional attachment to the mechs.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, people are still complaining about the Timberwolf, because to me, that is the MechWarrior mech. The mech from the cover of so many, cover arts, or and then in MechWarrior Online, it was a really good mech for a really long time. So people again rebonded with that mech and formed another emotional attachment with it, and then it got taken away.
The Timberwolf's a good example, and the Atlas is probably another good one. The Atlas is probably one of the most iconic mechs. It's effectively was the cover of the MWO launch screen. Here's another mech that people may have a emotional attachment to, or that PGI themselves may be invested in keeping iconic because people are so familiar with that vision of the Atlas and the glowing eyes. So, it just adds another layer of challenge that if you are going to balance by mech, if you're going to make mech-specific changes in an effort to balance the game, you're running up against a pretty big barrier in the way that people will feel about that mech and that attachment that they'll have.
Yeah, and I mean, if PGI haven't worked that out by now, then you've got to be worried, because I mean, the amount of backlash that you get every time you take, especially if it gets nerfed to the point where you take it out of the game functionally, like the Kodiak is still kind of usable and fun to play, but it, is nowhere near the lofty heights that it was once, and it did need to be adjusted. But then once it gets nerfed to the point where it's, the poor old Shadowcat, it's just seen nerf after nerf after nerf, and it's because of the way that because of the playstyle associated with it, more than because of the mech, really.
The Kodiak is probably a good example, and maybe the Shadowcat as well, is that we talk about balance being an effort to avoid a dominant strategy emerging, or at least staying the top of the rung for a period of time. Mechs maybe provide no better example of the fact that meta should actually be shifting, like you'd said last podcast. What you want something to be meta for a period of time. You want the Kodiak to be the power on the battlefield for a certain period of time, and then you do want it to maybe drop down.
Be superseded.
Yeah, drop down in relevance whilst another mech kind of comes through, and you almost want a carousel, a merry-go-round as mechs kind of cycle into relevance. But is that the challenge, where sometimes mechs are going to be the best, and you don't want your mech to fade to be bad, but there does have to be mechs that will occupy that lower rung of effectiveness, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the challenge, is to nerf mechs to the points where they're not king of the heap anymore, but try and maintain them so that they can actually still be used effectively.
So almost have a pyramid where you have a big bunch of, the bulk of mechs occupy the bottom rung, but they are still competitive, or they have a role to play. And then as you get up, you'll get, mechs at the very top that are the current meta, but it's just more important to have a mechanism where mechs are flowing up and down within that pyramid.
Yeah, as long as it's not too fatiguing, because I mean, you've been in the game long enough to see some of the, major balance revisions that have come into the game, like skill tree, for example. And those kind of changes, you've got to be careful not to. I mean, certain weapon changes can do it too, where if you put too many in a row or too many close together, where people are logging into their mech bay and going, ugh, look at all these mechs that I can't use now until I've had a look at them and worked out, how I'm going to fix them. And if you do that too often, then people are just going to not do it.
Yeah.
They're just going to decide to just go do something else.
Yeah, or they're just gonna go to a few mechs where they know that they can get some success out of.
Yeah, honestly, I think it does happen that if the change is too great, and the sort of the road to progress looks too steep, some people just find something else to do altogether. So that's where it's really nice, actually, where if you're making a balance change that affects a certain kind of mech, or that is supposed to affect a certain kind of mech, where if there's a mechanism where the players can shift to another loadout or another playstyle and still keep using that mech in a new way, that's quite nice.
Yeah, and we had a listener bring up a good point, WYSIWYG on Reddit. He talked about that in any balance change, what should be part of that change is that you can identify where the transition is You can say that if we are going to price people out of playing this certain style or this certain mech or this certain weapon system, we want to provide easy transition to another system or mech or
yeah, that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about, and it's a really good point that he made.
Yeah, shout out WYSIWYG. All right, so we've talked about some of the challenges in balancing mech and just how tricky that might be, and maybe more than anything else we've discussed thus far, there's a lot of pitfalls and constraints. What are some things that could be done about that? What are some things that we think PGI should consider if they are balancing by mechs? We've just talked about providing a transition. Is there anything else that, because of course, Russ is probably listening to this right now.
Of course. Hi, Russ.
Hi, Russ.
I don't know. Did you have any suggestions?
I've got a list.
Oh.
Professional podcasters. Some of the things that I've put down, and a wise MechWarrior said to me that when we're considering rebalance, then we should be looking at mechs that we see as successful at the moment, quote unquote outlier mechs, the IV4 being an example, and use that as a yardstick or a benchmark for what's needed to make a mech competitive.
Yeah, I think if you're talking about balancing upward, i.e. trying to put subpar mechs into the limelight, it's look no further than the IV4. This is a mech that on paper doesn't really have much going for it. It really comes down to the quirks that it's got and how they tie into the loadouts that it can take. So, I mean, for me, that's should be the bar where this is what it takes to make a substandard mech fun and desirable.
An IV4 might give you an example of the magnitude of change that you might need to implement to bring a mech from obscurity to giving it a reason to play.
Yeah, I mean, it is undeniably a fun mech to play. You can afford to make a mistake or two because it's so tanky. I mean, it should be mentioned as well that one of the major reasons why it's good was kind of by accident, as far as I can tell, which is that it had those 2 missile hardpoints on its side torso as well. That's not worth much when we can put in them as like LRMs or SRMs. Better give it a really good cooldown. But then all of a sudden, MRMs are a thing. Well, that 20% cooldown is worth a lot when you've got a 60-point alpha. And so it was, that sort of timeline of the mech being recognized as, not being able to do much with the weapon systems that were in the game, and then MRMs coming in, and then sort of a knock-on effect of how those weapons synergized with the existing quirks that made it, really, really fun to play.
Yeah, what we're saying with the IV4 is it had mech-related changes to it that made it good, and that would be the point to make, is that if you are going to rebalance a mech, that we look at mechs that are performing well, and we're looking at why they're performing well, and if they're performing well because of quirks or those things that are, or geometry or those things that are related to a mech, then those are the changes that you want to make, and those are the things that you should consider if you're going to reduce those things. If you're going to nerf something or change geometry, those are the things that you would consider about whether you should make a change to a mech or not.
Yeah, and I mean, I can already hear people saying power creep. But the thing is, we're talking with this particular point, the way I see it at least, is that we're talking about bringing up mechs that are currently not really represented in the game as it is. So, the mechs that we see in the game, the vast majority of them are the most viable and powerful ones, because who wants to drive a substandard mech more than occasionally? So by changing, by bringing up those substandard mechs, we're not increasing the amount of power level on the field. We're only increasing the diversity, and I think that is something that is to be desired. If what PGI want is for us to go out and collect as many mechs as we can, well, start by making all those crap ones something worth taking.
And that's probably the key, the next key kind of recommendation, is that you want to give people a reason to play the mech, and whether that's an emphasis on a certain role, or a certain quirk that synergizes well with a certain weapon. Either they can specialize really well, or they can carry out a certain role very, very well. That's kind of one of the decisions that you should make around balance. But it's, if we talk about that pyramid of power, and where mechs are in regards to their playability, you just want to be having mechs rise up through those levels and give people a reason to play them.
Yeah, and I mean, some of those quirks can be really interesting as well, because they can synergize, the word that I used earlier, they can synergize with the roles and builds that people are already taking with them. So they might not even necessarily make the mech potentially much more powerful, but they may make it better at doing its job, which kind of sounds counterintuitive. But let's talk about, say, the Raven 3L is one example of this, where its quirks are about knocking for the most part, and the loadouts that you can take synergizes with that. You can run around with a few lasers, and you can take stealth armor, and you can knock the hell out of people. Well, that makes, and it's got 100 meters extra sensor range as well, doesn't it? So that really plays into that mech's role really well, and it doesn't make the Raven 3L OP on the battlefield, but it does give it a reason to be in the game.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, a role could be, a role's not necessarily limited to a certain weapon system or something like that. You could get something like the Sleipnir, which its role is to be a mech that's really usable for new players, or something like that. Look, we talked about the Timberwolf and the Atlas as being iconic. That could be another role that they play. They are the mascots or the representatives for PGI. You make them competitive because people recognise those mechs and they are iconic, so you want them to be able to contribute on the battlefield. But either way, what you're saying is that as many mechs as you can, you give a reason to play them, and giving them a role is usually the most intuitive thing to give people a reason to play them.
Yeah, and I mean, there's plenty of mechs that have languished for years for no obvious reason. With the Gina is one that I'd pull out. It's it's okay. The Gina F. I'll read you all the quirks that the Gina F has. Okay, you ready?
Okay, I am.
Laser duration -5%. Base structure CT 11.
And that's, am I right in thinking a Gina has a CT roughly the size of an Atlas?
Yeah, it's a boat. It's a boat with legs.
Up there for ugliest mech in the game.
Oh, you just unsubscribe. A lot of people just smash that like button.
I've just offended the 4 people that like playing the Gina. No, it's
sorry, JC.
Yeah, it's a it's an example of where you can have a mech go the other way. That through geometry you can give people reasons not to play it. So that's kind of the challenge. And if we used the Gina as a case study, what would be needed to bring it up to a level, or what role would they want it to play? That would be something to suddenly make the Gina something that people want to take out again. They'd need to quirk it pretty heavily.
I mean, on paper, the Gina is all right. Like, if you just look at its sort of base stats and its the loadout that it can take, it's kind of as good as the things around it. It's just that it just, I think it's one of those ones that's really been a victim of timeline, that it was once really good, and then it's kind of been left to languish as it becomes more and more relevant over time.
Yeah, and I guess probably what we're advocating for here is that it's not that a mech like the Gina shouldn't have some time where it's not relevant, but you almost want an alarm clock on that stuff. If a mech hasn't been relevant for a certain period of time, that's when it pops up as a reminder to say we should do something about the Gina. And particularly when you are pouring more mechs in as part of the free-to-play model, it means that if you're considering from a balance perspective, that means that one of the things could be that you are periodically looking at every mech to see where it's kind of been in that pyramid, and if it's been down for too long, then you're making some active effort to bring it back up.
For sure. And I think it like a couple of ways that we've got this right recently, whether by design or by accident, is Solaris. Solaris allowed me to rediscover a whole bunch of mechs in my mech lab that were just gathering dust that I hadn't played since, open beta. Because, in their division, suddenly they were relevant again. And that was quite nice, actually, to be like, actually, this thing's not bad. I can put this and that on it, especially in a Solaris environment, which is quite different, of course. And sort of learn to love those mechs again. Another one is the stock mode. It was another one where it introduced me, at least, to a bunch of mechs that I didn't already own, and sort of forced me to go out and purchase those and skill those. And actually, a few of them I found, actually, I don't mind this thing at all.
But what, I guess what we're getting to there is that the game modes give a perfect framework for a reason to play mech. And Solaris is a really good example that some mechs will thrive in a one-on-one environment. And if a mech, let's say the Jenna, has been languishing for a period of time, suddenly you might give it a buff that means that it goes well one-on-one, and say it's in Div 7, if it suddenly becomes one of the go-to mechs in Div 7, people have got a reason to take it out. And, that's probably the key takeaway around balancing and the balance consideration for mechs. It's just giving people a reason to play it.
Yeah, and I guess, Solaris should be giving PGA a ton of good data about mechs and where they rank and, in opposition to each other. Because if a mech, for example, cannot compete in Div 7, well, it probably needs a look at it to, make it worthwhile for someone to go out and purchase that mech or, take it out of the garage.
Yeah, if it can't compete there, where can it compete? What
exactly
role
right.
has it got in the game? And yeah, you're exactly right.
Or if it's too good for Div 7, but still can't compete in Div 6, there's another one. It's just as bad, really.
All right, well, that's been a pretty good discussion, I think, on mechs. I think we've maybe highlighted that it certainly is a tricky part of the game to balance mechs. But, I think the takeaways are that people want a reason to play mechs, and they mean a lot to people. They mean a lot to the universe that is Battletech. And really, they should be treated with some kiddie gloves. They should be the last lever that you pull if it is that you want to make another change to a game. Would you agree to that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I just realized something, though, that we just talked about how emotionally attached people get to mechs, and then we bashed on the Jenna F. It was potentially not a good move. Well, send in your feedback, guys. Send it all to Cozened.
Yeah, so do send me feedback if you are traumatised by our discussion around the Jenna.
Hashtag offended.
No, seriously, guys. Obviously, as always, we do want to hear your feedback, and mechs are a hot topic. Obviously, everyone has their favourite, and please do tell us about whether you agreed with the stuff that we talked about today, or other suggestions that you may have. As always, we're keen to listen to what you have to say and incorporate that into our own opinions. We are here basically just to have the conversation, and we do want you to be part of that.
Indeed, yeah. Send us your Jenna F builds, OP.
Send us your quirk suggestions for Jennas.
Yeah, that's a really good suggestion. What would it take to make the Jenna F great again? I just had a look, by the way, while we were talking. Which division do you think it's in?
I'm going to say 5.
Oh, not far wrong, actually, but it is Div 4.
Div 4.
That's going to be pretty hard going versus those bushwhackers and crabs and dragons and Hunchback 2Cs.
Okay, so send us some feedback to tell us how many Solaris matches you've won in your Jenna and what mechs you're fighting against. No, okay, I think there's probably enough Jenna bashing for now. We don't want to shame any mech. Hopefully, it will find its way back into the annals of metas at some stage. But it does at least highlight that sometimes not all mechs are created equal. Alright, we are back, and we are here with everyone's favourite section, so I hope everyone's got their pirate hats on now, taking the tinfoil hats off and switched it for a pirate hat, because we're going to sail the Brown Sea.
Yarr.
Arr.
Always.
Yes, pirates we be. Right, I have a post from Reddit once again that I'm going to read out to you, Captain. This was posted by Tenacious B1. just a couple of days ago now. And Tenacious says, time to say goodbye to double strikes. Let's change the subject for a minute. All the other balanced nonsense aside, and the recent talk from Paul about cool shot issues, how are certain builds expected to showcase any kind of skill and rise above their squishiness when they are constantly dancing through clouds of red smoke? Even with busts to LRMs, which totally sucks, landing shots from your equipped weapons should reign supreme over consumables. Maybe I'm projecting a little bit because I totally use double strikes and think it's hilarious when it rips a piranha in half, but I would be glad to see it get the axe. Your thoughts, Captain? I mean, you've had to tackle the strike issue as a captain for MOBC.
Yeah. We did, as team leaders, have to. We were asked to vote on whether strikes should be included in MOBC, and then so we had a bit of conversation around that. And there were some really good points. I mean, first, I need to acknowledge that it does suck to get airstriked and killed, especially when you're just running along minding your own business and you just get caught in the crossfire of an airstrike, or you think you're safe and then suddenly an airstrike pops you. It can happen in a life, especially when you're flat-footed as a team. You can be put into quite a stressful situation where you're clustered behind some crappy piece of cover. There's too many mechs behind it and you're just getting struck to death, and that sucks. And in a way, it's kind of like LRMs. It's kind of, people can shoot you without you being able to shoot them back, which is kind of just unpleasant. So I need to acknowledge that. On the other hand, if you didn't have strikes in the game, that would mean that people can really just entrench themselves in the best camping positions without much fear of retaliation. So say up on the pinnacles in Tourmaline is one, where, if I got ER large lasers, I can sit up there and just farm away, and really the best option someone has is either to run all the way towards me, getting farmed all the way, or airstrike me. And a couple of good airstrikes can really put someone off the idea that they're going to keep poking that bit of, that really nice sniper's nest. So that's one major thing.
So, I mean, strikes are there obviously as formation breakers, as you were saying. Do you notice that you get hit by strikes, or that you get killed by strikes very often?
Not so much getting killed by them. Getting hit by them is pretty much an every game occurrence, perhaps, where, potentially there's, 2 per player on the enemy team. That's 24 strikes that might hit you throughout the game. Well, not hit you, but be launched at your team.
Yeah.
So there's a pretty high chance that you're going to get hit by at least one strike.
I mean, getting hit by is one thing, but I mean, getting killed, I think, is another. Like the reference to LRMs, I think, is probably a good one, because I think there may be another area of the game that just get a little bit of a bad rap because they aren't quote unquote direct fire, and people think that there's not any skill in using strikes. But I've launched 1,000 strikes and hit nothing. Do you think there's an element? Do you think there's an element of skill involved?
Oh, I mean, those strikes where you just get the most juiciest angle, and the enemy teams really cluster together in like a little valley or something, and you just pop in with the right angle and the strike comes available at the right time. I mean, and then you launch it. It's pretty good. It's pretty fun. But
Yeah.
I think, if anything, I get killed by trying to launch strikes, and just right when I pop out of cover in my light mech and try to launch my strike, someone bloody takes it.
Yeah, that's always fun, eh?
Did you do that 2 or 3 times in a row? Maybe that's the most dangerous thing about using strikes.
Yeah, I was going to say, is trying to use a strike and then getting killed. Like, I think Tenacious is maybe going a little bit, maybe saying a little bit too much here, that, how can certain builds showcase any kind of skill and rise above their squishiness. I mean, I actually like where strikes are at. I think that there is an element of skill, obviously not as much skill as other direct fire and other weapon systems, but there's certainly an element of skill in both placing a strike and when you're on the battlefield being aware of strikes. They are formation breakers. They do make people move. You do have the option to punish someone who's just entrenching in cover. So, I mean, I think they're pretty good. I mean, trust me, I've got a lot of experience with dying in the game, and I just don't, not a large portion of that goes to strikes.
Yeah, I think it's really punitive. Airstrikes are really punitive to stagnant gameplay. So if you're just sitting in the same place with a bunch of you poking out of the same cover, you're going to get struck to death. And so punishing that does keep the game more dynamic, because it only takes 1 or 2 strikes to usually get the message across that maybe we shouldn't be sitting behind this cover anymore, and we maybe need to actually act and do something.
Yeah, start moving.
The other one that should be mentioned perhaps is also that with brawler builds, it's one of the key ways that you can get some damage down range, where you try to close, with say you're trying to close with a bunch of Hellbringers behind a ridge or something. If you can drop strikes on your way up, you can really suppress and keep them down until you can get in range to use your SRMs or whatever it is.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. It is another option to attack with range for those that close range builds.
I think if we took strikes out of the game, we'd see a lot more blue laser farming from the back, from the a really nice position where someone can just set up and have a big overview of the battlefield for over 1,000 meters, and if you try to push them, they can just farm you down. Well,
yeah.
strikes help to prevent that kind of gameplay somewhat. Yeah,
for sure. And look, I mean, the community, there was quite a few replies on that post. So a lot of people kind of dived into the Brown Sea and answered. And truth be told, it was it's pretty much 50-50, I think. A lot of people have just more talked about tweaking the mechanism rather than getting rid of it. Some people have talked about getting rid of consumables and completely, but yeah, I agree. I don't find them that big an issue. I think the nerfs that happened to airstrikes recently by PGI, I think they actually they worked. Strikes
certainly see a lot more artillery, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's.
I'd be open to the idea of rebalancing some of those. And I'm not going to deny that it is potentially a bit of a Seabill sink for PGI, and that's part of the reason why it's in the game. It's just that they do serve a valuable purpose tactically as well. I mean, I've seen a couple of good suggestions that maybe could be looked at. They're quite major though in terms of implementation, which is making things like airstrikes like something that you actually need to equip on your mech and take tonnage.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think mechanism changes like that should be considered, but yeah, again, I think you should focus changes that you're going to make to improve the game on areas that you're going to get a better return on investment. And I kind of disagree with Tenacious. I don't think that they're that big a deal. I enjoy the state that they're in at the moment. I think that they should stay.
A bit of confirmation bias that you tend to notice when you get killed by something like an airstrike more than you notice when you just get killed by getting shot in the face.
Yeah, like same with LRMs. The number of times you die to LRMs compared to other methods, but those are the ones that stick with you. Those horrible deaths.
Where you just can't do anything. You're just getting smashed.
Yeah. Well, what we'd say to everyone is just remember that sound, that lovely bitch and Betty that says incoming missile. That's the sound that you need to remember.
Every time you hear that, think of us. Do we want them to do that? I'm not sure they wanted to.
You just listen, support us on Patreon. That's all that matters.
That's the key takeaway from this whole podcast.
Yeah. Should airstrikes stay, make sure you listen to us and support us on Patreon.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. Good post, Tenacious B. A lot of good chat there. And obviously do tell us whether you agree. Check out that post from Tenacious and have your say and read some of the responses there. There's some pretty good stuff from a lot of people there with some different options. So yeah, that wasn't too brown a venture into the waters of the Brown Sea. So yeah, looking forward to next week. So yeah, keep posting, we'll keep reading, and yeah, look forward to featuring something else next week.
Point 3, reporting task complete.
So that's episode 2 of our Balance series complete. Hope you enjoyed listening to that. As ever, we are keen to hear your feedback, and if you wanted to get in touch with us, you can reach out and contact us on Twitter at IncomingP. You could comment on our YouTube videos, or you could start a topic on Outreach HPG and tag us in it. And if you're listening to us on YouTube, do hit like and subscribe, and potentially have a look at subscribing to us on your favorite podcast platform. So hopefully you're seeing it distributing out there now. We're on Stitcher, Breaker, Pocket Casts, Radio Public, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Castbox. We're going to go on Apple soon as they sort whatever problems they're having out. And you can also find us on SoundCloud. And if you enjoy these podcasts and you'd like us to make some more, then we do have a Patreon where you can support us monetarily. There's a few reward tiers there. We're going to look at introducing some more. And for all commenters, we're going to put you in a draw, and potentially you can win a mech pack. Last week we said the same thing, so if you check out our YouTube channel, you can see that draw, and we do have a lucky winner there. And as we said earlier on, at the front end of the podcast, we are looking to wrap these balanced discussions up to a sort of conclusion, and that's going to entail what we're calling a mech scale, which will be a kind of a form that we're asking you guys to fill in, and then again we're going to offer some prizes to incentivize that, and you'll hear more about that soon. So we've had fun making these, and yeah, and we look forward to making some more, because so far it's been really enjoyable having these conversations with each other and with you. And we've got some exciting ideas for the future, which we're really looking forward to sharing with you guys. And if you had any questions, guys, do feel free to tweet them at us or email them to us, and we might end up discussing those on stream. Well, that's all for now. Look forward to catching you again on the next episode.